Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. I'm Nektaria Stamouli. I'm a reporter for Athens News Agency and the regional correspondent for Politico Europe. And with me today, I have a very distinguished guest, the Prime Minister of Kosovo, Mr. Albin Kurti. And we're going to discuss an issue that, it's of special interest to us here in Greece, the Balkans, and how the war in Ukraine affects the Balkans and whether it risks to inflame further tensions there. Mr. Kurti will make some brief opening remarks before we move on to the Q&A session. Mr. Kurti, welcome to Delphi. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this warm welcome, and thank you for having me at Delphi. It's my first time in Delphi, even though I've been many times to Greece. 2 weeks ago, we marked 1 year in office as a new government, and it has been generally a very good year for Kosovo. We did manage well the pandemic COVID-19. When I took office on 23rd of March last year, there were no vaccines and no contracts on vaccines. And nowadays, I'm proud to say that Kosovo is at the top of the Western Balkans when it comes to low death rates and high vaccination rate. We never even considered to take vaccines from Russian Federation or from China, only those which were European verified EMA and American FDA. Economy was doing well as well in this year. We have had 10.53% of GDP as economic growth. It is the highest since the liberation of our country. Then we have had increase in tax revenues by 34% without changing fiscal policy. Because when people are hopeful, when people are optimistic, they rather spend than save. And there is a new discipline in tax administration. And in addition, when people see that there is no corruption in the government, they are more ready to pay taxes. We have had increase in FDI, foreign direct investment, by 22% year on year. And then we, at the same time, had an increase in exports by 83%, including here ICT sector, where 60% of the products in information communication technology sector are for exports. But we also were doing well in exports of wood processing, metal processing, leather, textile, and food production. We made public education free even in the university level. And we also distributed some of the growth that we had. So we increased pensions by 11%, and specifically those for disabled people by 33%. We also introduced allowances for new mothers and for children. We received 1,449 refugees from Afghanistan as our humanitarian duty, but also as an obligation that we feel for our partner and ally, United States of America. We have 10% of those Afghan refugees still in Kosovo. And we showed readiness to receive up to 5,000 refugees from Ukraine. From the very first day when Russian invasion and military aggression took place in Ukraine, we condemned it harshly. And at the same time, we expressed our unreserved admiration, solidarity, empathy, and sympathy with the people of Ukraine, their liberation struggle, their resilience, and leadership of President Zelensky. We were fighting corruption in this year like no other year since we declared independence, or even since we got liberated 23 years ago. And around 300 state and public officials have been arrested for corruption. You know, corruption is very bad for economy, is very bad for citizens, is very bad for the state, but it is also very bad for the security. As President Biden put it clearly and accurately, criminality, corruption are national security threats. That's why we cannot tolerate anywhere, at any time, corruption, especially when it happens within the institutions of the state. Then we were very successful in foreign policy. We started reform of our diplomatic service, foreign service. But likewise, we have received the highest number of high visits to our country and abroad alike. We have increased by 216% subsidies for wheat per hectare. And for all the farmers, gas will be for their tractors without excise duty. In this way, we want to help those who produce, and especially local production in agriculture. We managed to inaugurate successfully a wind farm with 27 windmills, together with Foreign Minister of Germany, Annalena Baerbock, a month ago in a village, mountain village in Kosovo, with a capacity of 105 megawatts. And we are working on a new solar for heating park with a capacity of 70 megawatts. In addition, I would emphasize the fact that we have also increased the budget for our defense because we want to join NATO. And in this path, Partnership for Peace program is the key milestone. We want to join both NATO and EU, but it's very likely that due to many factors, we are first going to join NATO and then EU. Kosovo is a democratic country where opposition can win. And at the same time, we are a country which is seeking new recognitions in the world, but in particular in European continent, because we have 5 non-recognizers in EU and 4 non-recognizers in NATO. And I hope that also they will join sooner rather than later the majority of members in these 2 crucial organizations, I believe, not only for our generation.
So let me start from this last point that you mentioned. Do you think there is any potential, any of these 5 EU countries that have not recognized Kosovo, including Greece, doing that, recognizing your country?
We have good communication and cooperation with Greece. People of Kosovo with people of Greece, government of Kosovo with government of Greece. There are no open issues. So there is a bridge. We just need to cross it. And I believe that the time is ripe for Greece to recognize Kosovo. And before that, and especially after that, we could increase our economic cooperation with economic investments, but also our trade exchange. I think that Greece is a regional leader and could help Kosovo a lot in gaining other recognitions. So in these tectonic shifts in geopolitical circumstances, we join EU and NATO much sooner than anybody have been thinking, let's say, some months ago.
And how do you think Ukraine's NATO aspirations affect Kosovo's similar aspirations?
What I see nowadays in Ukraine is shocking, yet it is not surprising. Everyone who read a 5,000 words long article of President Putin from July last year would have noticed that there is no peaceful solution. From July last year, despotic President Putin announced a war manifesto against Ukrainians with a very interesting title, how historically there is historical unity of Russians and Ukrainians, basically saying that they are the same people. So when such a powerful person, who is not a Democrat, says that the other does not exist, and at the same time invests so much in military advantage of his own country that he wants to see as an empire. I believe conflicts are already inside the house. So regrouping of the troops at the eastern border of Ukraine were a technical issue after this manifesto of war from July last year. I think that he has interest on continuation of the war, and I see danger not only for Georgia and Moldova, but also for the Western Balkans. I say this because if a new conflict in Moldova or Georgia would be launched by Kremlin, then they would have to allocate a portion of their military power for these new battlegrounds. But in case of the Western Balkans, they could outsource it, so to speak, to Russian factors and actors in our region, namely Serbia, but not only. We see nowadays that Republika Srpska in Bosnia and Herzegovina has become like a Russian Kaliningrad in our region. We should not be afraid because our people are peace-loving nations, but at the same time we should be vigilant because there has been a build-up of military alliance and of energy dependence from Kremlin throughout these last 10 years. Just to take one example, in 2012, there has been only 2 joint military activities between Serbia and Russian Federation. In 2016, 50, and last year, 100, including 2 most notable, namely Slavic Brotherhood and Slavic Shield, whereas Republic of Kosovo participated with 330 soldiers in NATO military enterprise called Defender Europe 21, 27 nations together, and we were among 16 hosting countries.
Has there been you recently placed a request to the US to assist, to help Kosovo with NATO membership? Has there been any response?
We are in close cooperation with US, and we are doing transition of our army. We are increasing for 52% budget for defense, and we see US as an indispensable ally towards strengthening our security and defense and towards our steps for NATO membership. We also have a special relationship with Iowa National Guard, and I believe that with the Russian invasion in Ukraine, the prospect and the speed of Kosovo joining NATO has been accelerated certainly. But on the other hand, let us not forget that Kosovo and NATO are part of each other's history, present and future. Because on its 50th anniversary, NATO intervened against Milosevic Yugoslavia and Serbia to stop genocide against Albanians in Kosovo. And nowadays we have NATO troops in Kosovo. So Kosovo is not member of NATO, but NATO is integrated within Kosovo. And hopefully we can contribute to the continental security by becoming members of NATO. And we proved with co-deployment with US Army in Kuwait last year that our soldiers and our officers are no behind their NATO colleagues.
And what do you think the consequences would be in the Western Balkan nations if they're left without a NATO and EU future in the coming years? And may I ask, do the people actually on the ground, are they still interested, or did they get too tired from waiting, you know?
I have been myself critical towards EU, but never bitter and never cynical. But the critique that I developed, I learned it from Europe. So we are, intellectually speaking, not only politically, children of of Europe. And EU is the most important project of peace and prosperity, not only in Europe since the Second World War. So people might be frustrated, but at the same time we see no other alternative. We never get that angry so we could say we will go with some other superpower. No, NATO, EU, there is no alternative. Europe is our continent and EU is our destiny. Once Western Balkan 6 would join EU, the external border of EU would shrink for 3,000 kilometers. So in terms of security would be better. And at the same time, we would unite with our families, because every third citizen of Western Balkan 6 is not resident of Western Balkan 6. They are generally in Western Europe. 6 countries of Western Balkans, population-wise, they are more or less like Netherlands, 18 million, whereas GDP-wise, they are more or less like Slovakia. So I think that bringing in Western Balkans to the EU is very doable, and it would contribute to both of us, to EU becoming Europe, and to Western Balkan 6, which is in Europe, becoming EU.
What are the prospects of Kosovo-Serbia talks? And are you satisfied with the way the US and the EU are supporting these talks?
I participated in 2 meetings in Brussels with the President of Serbia. Talks are not easy, but I think they should continue. They are not easy because, in one hand, they do not acknowledge the crimes committed by the regime of Milosevic in the past. You know, in Kosovo, in spring 1999, we had 860,000 Albanians expelled from Kosovo. 80% of the people were expelled from their homes. Then 20,000 women were being raped by Serbian police and military forces. 12,000 unarmed civilians have been killed in around 400 massacres all over our country. 120,000 houses have been destroyed or burned down. And Serbia never showed regret or penitence for these crimes. And I urged Belgrade always to distance themselves from a regime of Milosevic, because non-recognition of independence of Kosovo and non-recognition of the crimes of the regime of Milosevic are 2 sides of the same coin. And I believe that here we need some emancipation of Serbia from the crimes of a regime which forced NATO to bombard Serbia. You know, whenever Russian Federation tries to compare itself in its invasion and military aggression in Ukraine with NATO intervention in Kosovo, they don't want to see something very elementary, and that is that 19 countries in NATO got together to bomb one country in Europe. It must have been very bad. And all these countries were democratic countries. Whereas Russia is one country, is not NATO. NATO intervention in Kosovo brought together 19 democratic countries who had oppositions, sometimes even against intervention, but nonetheless they decided so. Whereas in case of Russian Federation, you have an autocracy which is trying to use its military advantage for its own expansionism and imperialism. Therefore, there is no comparison between spring 1999 in Kosovo and spring 2022 in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think, one last question, very brief, because we're running out of time. What do you think the role of Russia is, and what it will be in the Western Balkans after this war?
I think that this war should end as soon as possible. And for this, we have to help Ukrainian people. We have to help their liberation struggle. We're going to have the end of the war when Ukraine wins. I do not see any other way how this war can end. Because you have a country, a nation, which wants to join both EU and NATO. And on the other hand, you have an autocrat who is both bitter and nostalgic and who wants to exterminate an entire nation. So nothing short of full victory of Ukraine will end this war. And I believe that precisely with this victory of Ukraine, we can say that we can start a new century. Otherwise, as long as this war continues, we are still not in 21st century. Because what we see today, we have seen in previous centuries. In order to start a new century, we need Ukrainian liberation struggle to win over Russian invasion and military aggression.
Mr. Kurti, thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. I mean, the Balkans, it's a never-ending, we could talk for hours, but we're out of time, and we hope we will see you in Delphi again soon and in Greece again soon. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much for having me.